Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We're going to continue on with our examination of Codex Sinaiticus. And so in our first video, we just went through and looked at some of the terminology that's commonly used with Codex Sinaiticus. We're basically just going through a Wikipedia article, looking at some of these words, familiarizing ourselves with these issues. And after we've done that, then we'll go on to other material. And so this is just sort of to get the ball rolling. And so where we got up to last time was the description. So I'm just going to read through some of this. Now, it is Wikipedia, and so there will be a few bits that we don't agree with. There will be some things that we do agree with. But at the end of the day, we just want to make ourselves familiar with these issues. And so let's just continue straight away. And so the description here is the manuscript is a codex, the forerunner to the modern book, made from vellum parchment. So here, vellum is prepared animal skin or membrane, typically used as writing material. Originally in double sheets, which may have measured about 40 by 70 centimeters. The codex consists of quires, and so a quire, it has here various measures of paper quantity have been and are used, although there are no SI units such as quires or bales. So it's a measure, a quire or a measure of 8 leaves, with few exceptions. And so like we see in some of our books that we'll have on our shelves, they'll be in certain amounts of, might be 16 or 32 pages put together, and then they are binded together. And so it's interesting to look at the quires because sometimes this helps us with understanding why the scribe wrote certain things or why certain mistakes were made. A format which came to be popular throughout the Middle Ages, this being 8 parchment pages laid on top of each other and folded in half to make a full block known as a folio. So here it says the term folio has 3 interconnected but distinct meanings in the world of books and printing. First, it's a term for a common method of arranging sheets of paper into book form. And so that's what we're looking at here. So sometimes you might have someone's written a folio and things like that. So there's different definitions for it. But this will become important later as we go through the quires, the folios, and things like that. So I'm just sort of pointing out that these are some basic printing terms that are good to know. Several of these were stitched together to create a book. The folios were being made from antelope skins. It looks like a bit of a typo there. But modern microscopic examination has shown otherwise. I don't know why they just don't test these skins, but most of the quires or signatures contain 4 sheets, save 2 containing 5. Now that's an old way of writing it. It looks like someone might have copied it and pasted from some article. Usually we wouldn't use the word save. It would say that in an old document like the King James, but we would use the word except 2 containing 5. It is estimated that the hides of about 360 animals were employed for the making of the folios of this codex. Each line of the text has some 12 to 14 uncial letters. Uncials are the capital majuscule type text, like we have the capitals, and usually we say uppercase and lowercase. Now, uppercase letters, it's actually uppercase. It comes from the printing terminology. Just trying to find a picture of that. So you would have a case, and so you would have the uppercase and the lowercase. So that's why we label them as such. And so you would have the the smaller letters, the minuscule letters, and the majuscule letters. So it's quite a basic sort of term, the uppercase and lowercase. It's very easy to understand that. And so has some 12 to 14 uncial letters arranged in 4 columns. And so as we saw, that produces this type of look. So we have the 4 columns, and so sometimes they would get a ruler and or a straight edge, and they would create lines, and sometimes those lines would be rubbed out later on. Sometimes they're still there, but that's how they did it. So arranged in 4 columns, 48 lines per column, with carefully chosen line breaks and slightly ragged right edges. When opened, the 8 columns thus presented to the reader have the same appearance as the succession of columns in a papyrus roll. The poetic books of the Old Testament were written stichometrically, writing each new poetic phrase on a new line. So that's interesting. So let's just open that article there. Okay, so it's the practice of counting lines in a text. Ancient Greeks and Romans measured the length of their books in lines, just as modern books are measured in pages. This practice was rediscovered by German and French scholars in the 19th century. Stikos, or stikoi, is the Greek word for a line of prose or poetry, and the suffix metri is derived from the Greek word for measurement. The length of each line in the Iliad and Odyssey, which may have been among the first long Greek texts written down, became the standard unit for ancient stichometry. I hope I'm saying that right. So, bit of a clue. If you don't know how to say something, just go to Google Translate, throw it in there, and go
stichometry
in an Australian accent, which is quite funny. Stichometry. So I was saying it correctly. It's good to do that, because oftentimes you'll be reading something like this in a series like I'm going to do. I might read this word 50 times, and so people want to hear it said correctly. So I think we get the gist with that. So let's just continue to move on. Writing each new poetic phrase on a new line in only 2 columns per page. The Codex has almost 4 million uncial letters. Each rectangular page has the proportions 1.1 to 1, while the block of text has the reciprocal proportions 0.91, the same proportions rotated 90% if the gutters between the columns were removed. The text block would mirror the page's proportions. Typographer Robert Bringhurst referred to the Codex as a subtle piece of craftsmanship. The cost of the material, copying time required for the scribes, and binding is estimated to have equaled the lifetime wages of one individual at the time. So that's huge. I mean, you think of how much you earn. That's a lot of money. So we would be saying that someone would have spent, say if you're in the United States and you were earning, I don't know how much the average wage is, but just say you're earning $1,000 a week as a tradesman or something like that. You're looking at $50,000 a year, and then you're putting that over a lifetime. You're talking about millions of dollars. And so that is something very interesting as well, that if this is such an expensive codex, why are there so many sloppy readings and blunders and just strange mistakes and letters blurred out and written over the top? And so anyway, let's continue. throughout the New Testament portion, the words are written in scripto continua, words without any spaces between them. And so what we mean by that is, if you look at this picture here, you notice that it just looks like someone's writing the alphabet down. And so oftentimes it's up to you to go through and put a line between words in your mind. So you're reading through and you're like, okay, well, that's the beginning. That's the end of one word, the beginning of another. And so someone fluent in Greek can do this, just as someone fluent in English could probably do this. Now, this might cause problems for certain words joined together can make another word, and that has been a part of issues with variants and things like that. But yeah. Okay, so where do we go to? Okay, so scriptio continua, a style of writing without spaces or other marks between the words or sentences. Words without any spaces between them in the handwriting style that came to be called biblical uncial or biblical majuscule. Okay, so the uncials, the majuscules. So as we looked at the uppercase and the lowercase, these are uppercase letters. The parchment was ruled with a sharp point to prepare for writing lines. The letters are written along these lines with neither breathing nor polytonic accents. So these are markings utilized to indicate changes of pitch or emphasis. So that means that you might get the modern day, I shouldn't say modern day, because most modern Greek doesn't have most documents don't have these breathing marks. But if you were to grab a Greek text, I'm just looking for just an average sort of Greek text that I might have here. You will see that there in the Koine Greek there are accent marks, breathing marks. So say NRK and hologos in John 1:1, you will have a breathing mark in front of the N, and that causes you to pronounce it N, not hen. And so smooth breathing, rough breathings. So they're calling these breathings or polytonic accents. So it says here, in linguistics, particularly phonology, stress or accent is the relative emphasis or prominence given to a certain syllable in a word or to a certain word in a phrase or sentence. That and so basically you might have the word say RK, and so the reason that they have certain breathings over words or certain points, grammatical polytonic accents, I should just say accents, over words, that emphasizes the way that you say it with the syllable structure. So say if we were to go to okay, how would you spell that in English? For some reason. We'll just go to John 1:1. Bible Hub. And you'll see that RK, it's broken up by these accents. So we go to the Greek. So that's the difference between a smooth breathing and a rough breathing here, the little backwards or forwards comma. So that is pronounced N, and then you have RK. So let's go to the lexicon here, and it's see how it has a breathing mark here. So that means the stress is put on there. So it's RK, and so you'll notice in the phonetic spelling that's how we usually understand there's a difference between or there is a syllable there. So it's R and then K, and so the stress is put upon the breathing mark is put upon the K, And so that's what they're talking about. So I think anyone who's done some basic Greek would know that. A variety of types of punctuation are used. So in other words, what it's saying here is this text is in early Greek, so it doesn't have these type of marks. What we saw in the Byzantine era is that all these type of breathing marks and accents came into play, and so all the words of the Bible were written with certain marks on them to show what stress you would have put on certain words. And so I guess it's like in English, we had a certain basic type of English, and now we have English with certain commas and full stops and brackets and even italics, and we have certain things for emphasis and quotation marks, and so it's just the Greek language just morphed into that. Now in modern Greek they don't have a lot of that, and so and that's got to be taken into consideration when you're learning Greek, that you are learning these accents in the Koine, which are basically the Byzantine, from the Byzantine era, where most of the Koine Greek didn't have these accents, and also modern Greek don't have them either. So you learn modern Greek, you learn the Koine Greek, but you're actually learning a Byzantine type of Greek, which has all these accents. And so I personally would learn all. If you're going to study Greek, you may as well go through and study the difference between all of them. So this is, it says a variety of types of punctuation are used: high and middle points, the colon, the diaeresis on initial iota and upsilon. So that's on the first iota letter, and the first upsilon letter, it has this. So I'm not actually sure what that is. Let's Google that. Aha, so it's got the two dots. So basically the two dots to indicate the separation of two distinct vowels in adjacent syllables when an instance of diaeresis. So I might work out how to say that properly.
Diaeresis.
Okay, maybe in English.
Diaeresis.
Diaeresis. Don't want any verbal diaeresis coming out. So that's on the initial iota or upsilon. Okay, so the first iota or the first upsilon in a word might have these double dots, and so sometimes that can come in handy, to know those sort of things. A few ligatures are used along with the paragraphos. So what is a ligature? A ligature is when you have a scribble, but it actually is a word, or it's 2 or 3 letters together. So like this, that looks like the stigma, I'm pretty sure, or in writing typography, so like we might see encyclopedia, and it has the A and the E squished together. And so but ligatures in I've actually got a good book on that on my website, tr.org.au. And so, but this is ligatures in printed Greek texts of like the Reformation era. But it's good to know that these things exist, because when someone like, say, recently Timothy Berg and Mark Ward on their program was sort of claiming that they were like fluent in Greek and that Bryan Ross wasn't. And I was like, these guys don't know Greek at all. Like, if you just go to my website, look up ligatures of early printed Greek by Ingram, you can see this amazing book. Now, hopefully I can zoom in enough for you to, oh yeah, that's good, because sometimes it would come up in a reader and it would be very hard to read. So if we just go down to the main substance, let's go down here. So we can see these ligatures. Let me just enlarge them. So say EL, epsilon lambda, looks like that in some of the, this is printed Greek. So this is why it took so long for Greek to become printed. Aldous, he had to formulate about 1,000 letters for the Greek language. And so they could have just done it in this type of thing. The Complutensian polyglot did that. But what we see in like the text of like of Stephanus, say, for example, that's a very common, the ST. And so you see the S here. You can't see the T because that's called a stigma with an extended S, basically. It's a sigma with a long S, which makes it into a T, or a tav, or tau, they would say. So the letter chi, or the word chi, sorry, which basically means and or also or even, it's written in all these ways. And so it's good to know what a ligature is. Now, if you look at this letter, that's a theta. Okay, so one amazing thing is Timothy Berg was saying Erasmus spotted a ligature in the text in Revelation chapter 1, verse 8, and he didn't understand it, and so he made an error there, or he omitted the word God. And I was like, so I went and had a look at he actually provided pictures this is on the Textual Confidence Collective with Mark Ward. And so I had a look, and it looked exactly like this. And I was like, that's just a normal letter of the Greek alphabet. It's not a ligature. But he was saying it's a ligature, like, something looking like this, or, he didn't understand it. And I was like, what that proved was Timothy Berg can't read Greek. not that Erasmus, world-leading expert, who lived with Aldous for 7 years and was a proofreader. Yeah, Aldous, basically was prolific in printing early Greek texts, and they would know these things without even looking them up. And so, anyway, I just thought it was hilarious to listen to Bryan Ross's program the other day. Mark Ward and Timothy Berg sort of really feel sorry for Bryan Ross for not knowing Greek. And it's like, you guys, you probably, by the looks of it, don't even know the alphabet, So anyway, that's a ligature. But let's just continue. So it says a few ligatures are used along with paragraphos. So let's look up paragraphos. I'll just keep this open and search here. Paragraphos, ancient paragraph markings. A paragraphos, ancient Greek, paragraphos, from para, meaning beside, like a parable, and graphen, to write, paragraphen. A mark in ancient Greek punctuation, marking a division in a text as between speakers in a dialogue or drama, or drawing the reader's attention to another division mark, such as the 2-dot punctuation mark. Okay, so you might have someone's about to say something, so you might have a line there. There are many variants of this symbol, sometimes supposed to have developed from the Greek gamma. The first letter of the word graphos, it was usually placed at the beginning of the line and trailing a little way under or over the text. So I wonder if I can actually get some pictures of this phenomenon. Maybe I can type in paragraphos. This. Okay, that's good. So that's what they're talking about here. These little writings, or are they? That looks like a little word. Maybe it was to point a certain marginal note or something, because it looks like a variant reading. It's hard now. I find Google isn't as accurate as it used to be. You used to be able to type in something like this and you would straight away get pictures of it. Now you get 15 choices and half the time it doesn't match up. So anyway, we sort of understand it's basically just something showing where someone was going to talk. I guess, it could be relative to a like quotation mark or something like that. Or it has here initial letter into the margin. Extent of this varies considerably. A plain iota, and so let's look at the iota, the 9th letter of the Greek alphabet. I don't know why they got the Jewish flag there. That's weird. But the iota is just like the letter I, is replaced by the epsilon iota diphthong almost regularly, commonly, though imprecisely, known as Itacism. Itacism. Iotacism and Itacism is a process of the vowel shift in which a number of vowels and diphthongs converge towards the pronunciation in post-classical Greek and modern Greek. So basically, to put this in a nutshell, you would have what a diphthong is. It's a bit like if you get two Greek letters and put them together, they can create its own separate word. Like say Georgios Babiniotis, the Greek linguist expert that I've been conversing with about the Komiohanium, his last letter, you'd think it would start with a B, but it actually starts with the letter mu. It's like, how do you pronounce your last name? It's like Babiniotis, but it's like it's a diphthong that creates the letter B. Because if it was an actual Vita, it's a V sound. They would say Georgios Vaviniotis. And at first I was sort of tempted to say it that way, but then I looked at how it was spelled and I was like, no, this is a diphthong. So we might see that in the word like angel. Okay. So in the Greek, it will just have angelos. So we'll have two gammas together. Two gammas get together, create an N sound. So it's angelos. It's not agelos. A diphthong is when you get two letters, you join them together, and it creates another letter sound. And so it's quite an interesting thing. And so maybe I should just quickly go to a diphthong. Maybe I'll type in Greek diphthong. Yeah, so a diphthong is a combination of two vowel sounds in a single syllable. The diphthongs are all these. And see, sometimes in modern Greek, you'll find that almost all of these equal the letter, just the pronunciation of E. Now, sometimes you have the letter I, and see this little dot at the bottom of the alpha and the eta and the omega, that makes it an iota subscript. So they just put the letter I down the bottom of it. So even though these ones have AI, I'm saying in English, alpha, iota, alpha, upsilon, etc. Here you have alpha, iota, but it's down the bottom. So it's an iota subscript, which usually means that the Greek is the dative. So a plain iota, so a normal iota, is replaced by the epsilon iota diphthong. Okay, so basically it's replaced by that, which sometimes it should just be a normal iota, but sometimes it's replaced by that. Almost regularly, commonly through, though imprecisely, known as Itacism. So I've got to work out how to say this word properly.
Itacism.
Itacism, that's better. I was saying Itacism. Didn't really help. So yeah, here we see some of the names. Like say this is the name for David, saying Matthew 1:1 would say that. So it has the epsilon and the iota instead of just the iota. So they're just saying sometimes they would add this extra thing, and most of the time it's just a phonetic way of doing things. So this is Pilatos, and so they have the epsilon iota there just for the iota here. And so this is Pharisai, so that means the Pharisees. And so you can see that the epsilon iota there, where it just has an O to there. So that's just a feature of Codex Sinaiticus. It does that. But sometimes that can be important too, because when did that start to happen? So when you're examining the age of a document, you can look at trends and go, well, was this a popular thing in the 4th century, or was it a Byzantine thing, or what other manuscripts do this? And so you would look at that. Okay, so that was a little bit technical, but let's go to the nomina sacra. Nomina sacra with overlines are employed throughout. So what a nomina sacra is, if you want to learn about nomina sacra, I recommend that you go to you start with my video on Jehovah or Yahweh. So I would go through that first. The Jehovah or Yahweh is, it's basically the foundation of understanding why they shorten names. So the first ever shortened name was the name of Jehovah. In the theophoric names, so we have names like Jehoshaphat, Jehoiakim. They were shortened to Josaphat and Joachim. Why were they changed? Well, some people were worried about saying the name of the Lord in vain, which was one of the commandments. And so, saying these things at the wrong place or the wrong time and having God's holy name there, and we know the Jews have been obsessed with the name of God. And even to the point now where oftentimes they don't pronounce it. They just say Adonai or Elohim or Hashem. And so, but we say the name of Jehovah. We think that's perfectly fine. But in the names of some of the Israelites, a lot of the Israelites, they had, like say even Benjamin Netanyahu, it has Jeho in the back of it. So that proves that it's Jehovah, not Yahweh. But anyway, if you want to go through my video, I prove that. And then if you go into nomina sacra in the New Testament, many times you'll just see this type of thing. So you see Kyrios, so it's a kappa and a sigma with a line above it. Now, this wouldn't be written like this in Codex Sinaiticus. It would be more like a kappa and a capital C, because the capital C type letter was the S, but it's changed into this like sort of like E-looking thing. So that's Kyrios, which means Lord, Jesus, iota, sigma. So basically what they're doing is getting the first letter and the last letter, and they're just scrubbing everything in the middle, but they're putting a line above the word, a bit like when we have the word don't, we go do not, we squish it together and we put a little apostrophe above or before the T, just so people know that we've contracted that. So these are contractions of holy names. So at first there was like 5. It was like Lord, Jesus, Christ. I think it was Father, and Spirit or something like that. But eventually it sort of moved all the way through to even to like, Mary got one as well, And so I'll just read through the English ones here. Lord, Jesus, Christ, Spirit, spiritual, Son, Anthropos, man, heaven, Uranos, David, Jerusalem, Israel, Mater, mother, Pater, father, Soter, savior. So that's that. They're the type of nomina sacra that appear in that manuscript. The portion of the Codex held by the British Library consists of 346.5 folios, or 694 pages, 38.1 centimeters by 34.5 centimeters, constituting over half of the original work. So they've got just over half of the original work at the British Library. So it's like, okay, where's the rest of it? And so that's where it gets interesting, because there's some of it in St. Petersburg, and that becomes very interesting with Uspensky and other people. So of these folios, 199 belong to the Old Testament, including the Apocrypha. So the Apocrypha, the biblical or related writings not forming part of the accepted canon of Scripture. So basically the word Apocrypha for us people in English means of doubtful authenticity. Now, people go, oh, the King James had the Apocrypha in it. It's like, yeah. Well, it means of doubtful authenticity. The King James also had 50 pages of genealogical pictures, like little circles that had Adam and Eve, and then went down and just had these massive genealogical tables. And it also had, to find Easter forever, and to find, church days, and certain days they'd have holidays, and the church calendar, and it had a massive preface to the translators to the reader and all this sort of stuff. Now, most of that's not in the Bibles today. So when you go, oh, the Apocrypha should be in there, so, well, okay, or should all this other stuff be in there? We just want the Bible. They didn't think the Apocrypha was part of the Scripture. When King James was asked, do you follow the Apocrypha? He said, no, I'm not a papist. They understood that it was not inspired Scripture. But they also understood that some people thought and felt that it was good to know these words, and also the reason that they translated it, or one of the reasons they translated it, was because the Roman Catholic editions had mistranslated this. And so in apologetic work, in showing that these were apocryphal books, it's good to have an exact 100% accurate translation of them, so you can say to your Roman Catholic friends, look, this is what it really means, and this is what it says, not what the Reem has said, over because that even the Lord's Prayer was distorted and changed. They would change everything in their Bibles, the Roman Catholics, and so let alone the Apocrypha. And so that was one of the reasons why they had the Apocrypha as well, because the main objection of the Protestants was the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. So they were coming against those things as well. So there were many different reasons, but that's part of it. Okay. The portion of the Codex, so I read through that. So it included the Apocrypha, the deuterocanonical books, and 147 and a half belong to the New Testament, along with other books, the Epistle of Barnabas and part of the Shepherd of Hermes. So we went through that last time. And these will become more important as we go along, and I will probably read through the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermes, just so you know what it means and what it contains. We're going to look at all these apocryphal books, and I have gone through the preface of Sirach in the Greek, matching that with the 1821 Greek of Zosimus, and so this is part of the Sinaiticus project of examining where Sinaiticus came from, because some people are claiming that it is a modern day forgery. And so in examining that, we're looking at do the words of certain parts of Sinaiticus match up with printed editions. So that's why we've been comparing some of these editions. And one of the printed editions that Simonides said that that he copied from was Zosimus. So that's the 1821 Bible, Greek Bible. So I've been comparing Sirach with that. So obviously these are apocryphal type of books, and but yeah, it was interesting going through that, and so I will go through that information and explain it to you at another day. The books of the New Testament are arranged in this order: the four Gospels, the Epistle of Paul, Hebrews, follows 2 Thessalonians, the Acts of the Apostles, the general epistles, and the book of Revelation. The fact that some parts of the Codex are preserved in good condition while others are in very poor condition suggests that they were separated and stored in several places. Now, this is quite interesting, because some people have made the claim that the poorly preserved texts were modified. So forgers back in the time of the discovery of Sinaiticus would use tobacco, lemon juice, dirt, all sorts of things to rub on the manuscript to make it look aged and yellowed. And so this would give an appearance of age. So a forger, if you were going to have a painting, you would a painting forgery, you would do this to a painting. And so while large parts of the Old Testament are missing, it is assumed that the Codex originally contained the whole of both Testaments, about half of the Greek Old Testament or Septuagint survived, along with the complete New Testament, the entire Deuterocanonical books, the Epistle of Barnabas, and portions of the Shepherd of Hermes. So let me just describe this in a nutshell. Okay, so it's assumed that it had the New and the Old Testament. Okay, it's assumed that it had all the Deuterocanonical books. Okay, so the Apocrypha, and also had the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermes attached to it as well. Okay, so about half of the Greek Old Testament, which is they call the Septuagint, but that's sort of a bit of a there's a lot of issues with that name. Everyone would agree there's a lot of issues with that name, but it's labeled the Septuagint. So about half of that has survived. So we've got basically half of the Old Testament, the Greek Old Testament, along with a complete New Testament. So the whole entire New Testament survives. So that's where we, as Textus Receptus people, we look at this and go, this causes problems because it has so many distorted readings, so many variants, so many problems, and they're trying to introduce these into modern Bibles. So that's where it comes in. So let's look at the contents of Sinaiticus. So where it starts, where it goes to. And you got to understand too, a lot of these books won't be in the order that you're used to in your Bible. So, okay, so let's have a look here. The text of the Old Testament contains the following passages in order. So Genesis 23:19 to Genesis 24:46. So it's fragmentary. So you'll have, bits of broken stuff. And so maybe I can even go there. Might even have a picture of it. Sinaiticus, images. So you might get something like this, broken bits. Yeah. So fragmentary just sort of means it's a bit like this. There are bits of it. Okay. So Leviticus. So basically, when you're looking at this from Genesis all the way through to Leviticus chapter 20, it's missing. Okay, so Leviticus 20:27 to 20:30, it has that. Then that's missing all the way through to Numbers 5:26 to Numbers 7:20. So that's in fragments too. So not only is it in fragments, but there's huge chunks missing. Okay, so Deuteronomy in fragments, Joshua in fragments. So I won't read these numbers. I'll just say maybe a few chapters or half the book and just sort of summarize it, or else I hate saying 21st this and that and all the numbers. The book of Joshua in fragments. The book of Judges, it's got a few chapters there in fragments. First Chronicles, it's got about 10 chapters there. Ezra to Nehemiah it says it looked like Esdras, so that's an apocryphal book, 9:9. Book of Esther, and then we have book of Tobit, apocryphal works, the book of Judith, First Maccabees, Fourth Maccabees, book of Isaiah, book of Jeremiah, book of Lamentations, the Minor Prophets, omitting the book of Hosea, the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Wisdom of Solomon, the Wisdom of Sirach, and the book of Job. So then the text of the New Testament is arranged in the following order: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Romans. So it doesn't have Acts there, you'll notice, but it comes later on. 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Hebrews, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Acts, James, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, Jude, and Revelation. So the Codex includes 2 other books as part of the New Testament, the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermes. text type and relationship to other manuscripts. Okay, so they're calling it Alexandrian text type. I've noticed in the last 10 years, people try and shy away from these type of categorizations because the CBGM does favor Byzantine readings in many places. And so they're changing back some readings. For most of the New Testament, Codex Sinaiticus is in general agreement with Codex Vaticanus. It's quite amazing. When they make these claims, like it's in general agreement with Codex Vaticanus and with Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus, attesting the Alexandrian text type. What you got to understand is there is so much difference between these two that they shouldn't even be classified as the same type of family. I'm just trying to think of an example, but there's hardly any examples in the real world where something is so like that. These things are so far apart, but they're classified as one. But I guess it's like saying, if you're into American politics and you've been watching, there's an interesting lady called Candace Owens. Like she's an African-American lady. And she gets called a racist. Now, we've got a guy here in Australia called Ruckman. I think he's from Sri Lanka. So he's very dark. And he got called a white supremacist because he's just coming. He's just basically wanted to interview people at a rally, and they were saying he was a far right white supremacist. And so I guess that type of categorization where you've got these things that are so opposite, they're saying they're the same thing, and this is what I find. These people just aren't good at categories. Well, they are. They're deceptive at categories. So in a sense where they put things, they say the TR editions differ so much from each other that they're so far apart, but these two, they're so close. You know what I mean? They pretty much just say the opposite thing. Usually when it comes to textual criticism, if you get what they're saying and say the exact opposite, usually you get the truth. That's unfortunate. But so if you were to read Burgon, he would say Codex Sinaiticus is in huge disagreement with Codex Vaticanus. And he said that it's easier to find a place where they disagree than where they agree. So, but here they're like, no, it's just general agreement. I know this is just Wikipedia, but that's the consensus usually. The Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus. So for those who aren't aware, Codex Vaticanus, this was a document that was found in the Vatican Library. I think it was in 1478, was it? I might actually go to the article. Text type, contents. We want discovery. History. Okay, why isn't it showing me dates? They're going history, like way back in history. I mean, let's just type in Vatican, where it has been kept from at least the 15th century, they're saying. Okay, so that's Metzger and Ehrman. Let's go down here. The Vatican Library. The manuscript is believed to have been housed in Caesarea in the 6th century together with Codex Sinaiticus. So there's a myth that they've been together. Okay. That's revisionism for you. As they have the same unique division of chapters in Acts. It came to Italy probably from Constantinople after the Council of Florence. The manuscript has been housed in the Vatican Library, founded by Pope Nicholas V in 1488 for as long as it has been known, possibly appearing in the library's earliest catalogue of 1475 with a shelf number of 1209, but definitely appearing in the 1481. So around 1485, 1481, they were like, okay, we've got this manuscript. In the catalogue of 1481, it was described as a Biblia in Tribus Columnus ex membranus in Rubio, the 3-columned vellum Bible. Okay, so this is the one Erasmus was able to, through Bombasius, so he lived with Bombasius, and Bombasius eventually became, so this is Paulus Bombasius. It's good to know about these people. He eventually became the curator of the Vatican Library. And so, and it's good to know that Erasmus, they talk about the correspondence between these guys as if they're strangers. They live with each other for like a year. So they don't tell you those type of things many times when they're talking about the Textus Receptus, because they don't want you to get too interested in all the details, because if you read all the details, it is pretty certain that Erasmus looked at this manuscript personally. But they just want to make out, no, he never did. And it's like, okay, what proof do you have of that? Well, because I said so. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, so let's move on from Vaticanus. So they're saying it's in agreement with Vaticanus. So it's in agreement with Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus. Okay, so what is Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus? Oops. Let's get rid of that. Oh, now we're going. I'm trying to turn off that little ad that came up. 5th century CE Greek. It's in France, and so it looks like this. Okay, so I'm pretty sure Ephraemi Rescriptus was the one that didn't Tischendorf. He deciphered it, and so it had. So it was a palimpsest. So palimpsest is when you're writing over another document, but in the background it had this type of writing here. So that's the older text. So it had a newer text written over the top. So Tischendorf was able to go through and decipher that one at the bottom. So that was seen as his claim to fame. It was quite a hard thing to do. He actually put chemicals on the manuscript, which caused these letters to come through in a certain way. So, which is probably going to destroy the manuscript quicker. But I guess what's the point of having a manuscript if you can't read it? I guess that's what they would have thought, when nowadays that would be anathema, just pour chemicals all over it. So when we look at Codex Rescriptus here, this is in 1 Timothy 3:15 and 16, where it has God was manifest in the flesh. So you can see it has the old writings underneath, but then you have the new writing on top. And so that's where they would say, mega, so, great, estin is, the mystery of, and it should say godliness, God was manifest in the flesh. So I think it's either here or there. Yeah, so I won't get right into that. So that's Ephraemi Rescriptus. Okay, so that's going to be something that we look at as well with the history of Tischendorf. So when we're looking at Tischendorf was an amazing scholar as well, in a sense where we can look at some people who know original languages. We can look at people who, say, decipher the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that. Great scholars, but they mightn't be in the truth. Just because you can decipher an alphabet and a word here and there doesn't mean that you got the truth. Oftentimes we think that if someone has a certain ability, that they have truth. Truth and ability don't go together. You can have someone who is a brilliant, very smart, intelligent person, but they're wicked to the core. We see this in many of the rulers of the world. They know a lot. They're well educated. They know better, but they choose to dominate over people, to be tyrants and things like that. And so, just because Tischendorf was brilliant in doing this type of thing, it doesn't mean that he had truth. Okay. So they're saying Codex Vaticanus, Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus, they attest the Alexandrian text type. Now, in the old classifications, you had the Western text type, which was basically sort of like the Latin. Then you had, and when I say it's like the Latin, it's Greek texts that are like Latin. Then you had the Caesarean text type, which was Even Metzger said it's probably almost non-existent. And then you had the Alexandrian text type, which was sort of like Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, Ephraemi Scriptus. And then you had the Byzantine text. So the Byzantine text is like 99.9% of all the manuscripts. So there's only really about 50 manuscripts that are sort of classified as, the Alexandrian type, in a sense, where you might have different Alexandrian readings, but like, this is a wholesale Alexandrian text type. You've got about 50 of them. And so the rest of them, of the 5,200 manuscripts, are Byzantine. Okay. And it just depends too. Sometimes they'll classify something as Alexandrian just simply because the dating system, they say, you can't have a Byzantine text before the Byzantine era. So sometimes that depends whether it's before Chrysostom or before Justinian. And then they're like, well, we call it a Byzantine text because the Byzantine text, Byzantine era started from there, where then they say, well, you can't have a Byzantine text before then because you didn't have the Byzantine Empire. It's so they're restricting reality by their labels. And so they love these labels. And so I think the CBGM is a whole nother mess. But these labels were amazing, because what you had basically was the majority of manuscripts. Then they went, let's classify these other ones as, Alexandrian and Western. And so it sounds like you've got these 4 competing groups, where really you've just got one huge group of manuscripts called the Byzantine, which are pretty much cohesive, meaning that they agree with each other. And then you've got all these aberrations. And some of them have the same mistakes. You know what I mean? And so, but they classify them together and go, we've got these 4 groups, almost like you've got these 4 votes. Like, who votes? Yeah, it's like 3 against 1. Yep, we vote the Textus Receptus out. We vote the majority text out, sort of thing. And so, okay, so back to here. So they're saying they're in agreement. A notable example of agreement between Sinaiticus and Vaticanus is they both omit the word ek without cause or without reason or in vain in Matthew 5:22. But I say unto you, whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. Now, this is an amazing statement, because, okay, they agree that this word shouldn't be in there, but it creates a huge contradiction, because did Jesus ever get angry? Basically, they read it, whosoever is angry with his brother shall be in danger of judgment. But then it says that Jesus looked at them with anger, in the Gospel of Mark. And Jesus got angry quite frequently. Didn't he make a whip and start whipping people out of the temple? And did he get angry? Yes. But he got angry with a cause. Here it has, if you get angry with your brother without a cause, you're in danger of judgment. But if you're angry with a good cause, that's fine. It's good to be righteously angry about something. You don't just get angry. It's not like road rage. You're just going along and someone cuts you off. It's a small little thing, but you just had a bad day and you lose it. That's being angry with that. Or you just hate black people, or you just hate white people, or you hate Asians, or Asians hate you, or that's being angry without a cause. You're angry at a whole group of people, and 99.9% of those people you've never met. You've got to be careful of that type of thing. And so there's a lot in that verse, but it's amazing. These two chop it out, throw it in the bin, and cause a massive contradiction in the Bible. So the whole issue of anger in the Bible is distorted in these modern Bibles. But in John 1:1 to John 8:38, Codex Sinaiticus differs from Vaticanus and all other Alexandrian manuscripts. Isn't that interesting? So they differ, but apparently they're the same, but they're different. You know what I mean? It is in closer agreement with Codex Beza. Okay, so this was named after Theodore Beza. We usually call it Codex Beza. I don't know. It's just a thing where we say Theodore Beza, and we call this Codex Beza. I think it's just to make that distinction, because some people, usually when you're talking on this type of level, people go, oh, you're talking about the King James comes from Beza, and they think this, it's like, no. So this is like a 5th century manuscript called usually Codex D, okay? Now, this was almost like a paraphrase. So it had Greek on one side, Latin on the other. Codex Beza Cantabrigensis, and so is a codex of the New Testament dating from the 5th century, written in uncial hand on vellum. It contains both Greek and Latin, most of the 4 Gospels and Acts, with a small fragment of 3rd John. A digital facsimile is available here. So, so that's another manuscript that we could look at, later on. But they're just making comparisons. So I just thought I would show you that one. So Theodore Beza, he ended up having this. Yeah, it's amazing. They're like, they didn't have any ancient manuscripts. They didn't know about them. They didn't. Yeah, he had this. You know what I mean? And he had many other times he was saying, I have an ancient manuscript. And they're like, now they're like, we don't believe you. They don't believe Erasmus. They just almost view these people like they're Scientologists or something. No, they were scholars. And very good scholars. And so they're saying that from John 1 to the end of John 8, it was closer to Codex Beza in support of the Western text type, okay? For example, in John 1:4, Sinaiticus and Codex Beza are the only Greek manuscripts with the textual variant en after zoe estin, in him is life, instead of en after Zoe N, in him was life. Okay, so difference between is and was. This variant is supported by Vetus Latina and some Sahidic manuscripts. So what is Vetus Latina? Vetus Latina, Old Latin, also known as Vetus Itala, Old Italian. Itala, Italian, and Old Italic is designated by the sigillum, by that little symbol, and is the collective name given to the Latin translation of biblical texts of both Old Testament and New Testament that preceded the Vulgate, the Latin translation produced by Jerome. So when they're talking about the Vetus Latina, they're talking about the Old Latin before Jerome. So there's a lot of these manuscripts, and many Textus Receptus readings are found in these manuscripts, which is quite interesting. Okay, so this variant is supported by Vetus Latina, so it's in the Latin and some Sahidic manuscripts. So let's just check out the Sahidic, just so you know what we're talking about. Sahidic, a collection of manuscripts of Sahidic translations, often designated by COP, so Coptic, and with a little subscript of SA, COP, and then an SA in the at the top there. An academic writing and critical apparatus, SA for Versio Sahidica in the BHS. So that is I'm sure the BHS is a Hebrew. BHS in textual, whoops. Biblia Hebraica Statagensia. So that is the Hebrew text that comes from 1967, I think it is. So anyway, I'm sort of rabbit trailing here. The first volume was 1977, sorry. Okay. So it's based on Kittel. So not the Nazi Gerhard Kittel, but Rudolf Kittel, who was his father. So that's the coding that they just have SA in the BHS. The first translation into Sahidic dialect was made at the end of the 2nd century in Upper Egypt where Greek was less well understood. So the Sinaitic is famous for being the first major literary development of the Coptic language, though literary work in other dialects soon followed. By the 9th century, Sinaitic was gradually replaced by neighboring Bohairic and disappeared. Knowledge of the Sinaitic manuscripts was lost until they were rediscovered in the 18th century. In 1788, Wood issued a prospectus. So here's a picture of him. Nice hair. Would have been a wig, I guess. A prospectus in which he pronounced his intention of publishing from Oxford manuscripts the fragments of the New Testament. Okay, so it's basically an older language and it's died out. And so this is one of the things. Sometimes you might have Coptic, Ethiopic. So here you have Coptic, Sinaitic. And so, yeah, so basically that's what Sinaitic is. So they're saying this variant is supported by the Old Latin and some Sinaitic manuscripts. And notice it's some, it's not all. And even on the Sinaitic here, there have been many Coptic versions of the Bible, including some of the earliest translations into any language. So it's an interesting language to look at, to think about. This portion has a large number of corrections. There are a number of differences between Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. So here we are, it's like in general agreement, but then there's a number of differences, okay? So textual critic Hermann C. Hoskia enumerated 3,036 differences. So who was Hermann Hoskia? Well, Hermann Hoskia, he collated 200 manuscripts of the Book of Revelation, collated them. And so there's about 350, I think, manuscripts of the Book of Revelation today that are extant. But he, in his day, so we're talking about 1929, he had produced a work basically showing the collations of Revelation. But he also worked on Sinaiticus, on Vaticanus. He defended the Textus Receptus. Now, am I a friend of Hermann Hoskia? Well, Hermann Hoskia actually went to a spirit medium one time to find out the provenance of a manuscript, which I would not recommend people do, to get a witch to tell you where this manuscript came from. But he was obsessed with these type of manuscripts, and he actually was an international banker, and he was instrumental in the formation of the World Bank and the early International Monetary Fund. So around the period of the First World War. So he was a very rich man, and he actually impoverished himself by spending so much money getting manuscripts photographed. So he was sending piles of money to people to go to places to take photos of manuscripts. And so he spent a fortune doing this. So I guess his heart was in it, but he had some strange motivations. Now, he was contemporary with Dean John William Burgon, with Miller, I guess with Scrivener, perhaps. But he, around that era, he sort of survived. It says here he died in 1938, so he's still quite modern. But he was an advocate for the Textus Receptus. But what you got to understand is Hoskia, Burgon, Miller, and some of these other guys, their understanding was not so much for the Textus Receptus, but for what they call the traditional text, which is the puppy feet of the majority text. So they saw that there were certain readings that, we're not going to go with them, we're going to go with other readings. And so anyway, it says here, he collated every known manuscript of the Apocalypse up until 1918. This took 30 years. So he published it in 1929. So this is Hoskia. I don't know why they don't just have a good picture of him, because that's like a bit of a clowny sort of picture. But that's what you find in Wikipedia. Oftentimes they're trying to make modern text critics look great and make anyone who is supportive of the Textus Receptus look like a buffoon. And so, okay, so we've got a whole article here on differences between Sinaiticus and Vaticanus on Wikipedia, so we can look through that. So that would be an interesting one to go through. And yeah, so you see here, Aleph, Coptic, Italic, Syriac, Vaticanus, and so you can look at some other manuscripts that had those same type of errors, almost, funny readings. So, but it's not complete. It seems to just go to John and then it fizzes out. So someone's gone through and started this. It looks like an individual, because it's gone to the Gospel of John and then it's just died. So, and this is quoting Burgon, Hoskia. So it looks like it could have actually been someone who was involved either in the majority text or Textus Receptus. There's Burgon, Hoskia, and these other guys are heroes of the TR camp and also the majority text camp, pretty much because they had enough bullets to come against Westcott and Hort and their rubbish in their day. But see, Dean Burgon, he wasn't a TR advocate. He advocated for the traditional text. So while you have the Dean Burgon Society by someone like D.A. Waite, and D.A. Waite would be considered a Textus Receptus guy and a King James guy, Dean Burgon, he didn't necessarily agree with everything that someone like Waite believed. And so I think the name is just unfortunate. I think Waite should have called his society, like instead of the Dean Burgon Society, like the Textus Receptus Society, would have been a little bit better. But it's like, because Burgon, he was not a scholar of the capability of someone like Beza or Stephanus or the King James translators. Now, he was good enough to point out the problems in Westcott and Hort, but it's a bit like, imagine if you had someone, I'm using this as an example, so I'm not saying he is a Seventh-day Adventist, but I'm just saying it's like having a Seventh-day Adventist do a creation seminar. It's like they can say some good stuff, but it's like they're Seventh-day Adventists, you know what I mean? That they can point out some truths in the Bible, but it's like there's baggage. And so Dean John William Burgon had baggage, and he pointed out a whole bunch of mistakes in the Textus Receptus. As I said, Herman Hoskia, he was visiting spirit mediums to find out the provenance of certain manuscripts. Now, when we look at his book, Codex B and its allies, brilliant stuff. Like, it's really good stuff to go through and read through. But you, like I said, you just got to be careful with what some of these guys are saying. Just like when you go through some of the material of Metzger or Abbott, like Abbott was a Unitarian, and a lot of these people who were involved with textual criticism were bad. And so you can't just side yourself with someone of that era. You've got to be really careful doing that. A lot of people just go, oh, Scrivener, and they side with him when he was actually just like Westcott and Hort, but just with a tiny bit of an affiliation towards the TR. And he just so happened to be the one who was commissioned to make the printed TR of that era. And so people go, he's my hero. You know what I mean? And so you just got to be careful doing that. So I don't align myself with Hoskia. I've found some errors in his work when I was doing Revelation 16:5, and he didn't seem to recognize the noun phrase there at all at Revelation 16:5. And so, yeah, there were certain things that were very helpful in his work. But I was like, man, anyone could do that type of work if you're just you're just looking at a manuscript and saying it says this. Anyone can do that. I mean, that's the sort of work that von Sodden's done, Caspar and A. Gregory. You don't have to be spiritual at all to basically count beans, you know. So anyway, so that's so Herman Hoskia, he enumerated 3,036 differences. So that's where we get the saying Vaticanus and Sinaiticus differ in the Gospels alone over 3,000 times. So that's usually what we say. Now I'm going to get a book here. I'm going to go to my email, so I might do it a little bit more personally. Not that I really care, but I don't. Sometimes you don't know. Someone sent you an email and they're like, "Oh, you're in contact with that person." So what am I looking at? Scott Jones. So I'm just going to find this book by Scott Jones. Okay. Let's see. Flow here. I found the section. So I'm going to read a little bit from Scott Jones's book, which is brilliant. Okay. He says, I will also soon demonstrate to the hilt that these following words which Burgon began to say, Aleph, B, and D are three of the most scandalously corrupt copies extant, exhibit the most shameful mutilated text. So this is Burgon. Exhibit the most shamefully mutilated texts which are anywhere to be met with, have become, by whatever process, for their history is wholly unknown, the depositories of the largest amount of fabricated readings, ancient blunders, and intentional perversions of truth, which are discoverable in any known copies of the Word of God. So that's what Burgon thought of. So he says Aleph, B, and D. So we're talking about Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and Codex Beza. So I should have said this earlier, but Theodore Beza had Codex Beza, and he actually donated it to, I think it was the British Library. I'm pretty sure it was, or Cambridge Library. I can't remember which one it was, but he had a little note that basically said that I'm paraphrasing. This is a curious work, but it should never really be, translated or, used. It's like, it's just an ancient work, but it's so filled with error that don't use it, sort of thing. But it's quite amazing. See, that's how I view Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. But see, some people view Vaticanus and Sinaiticus as the best ever, and they put them together and they go, see, if you put them together, it's the Word of God. But to me, it's just like Codex Beza, which is corrupt. So they view Codex Beza as corrupt, and they're like, no, they shun it. I view it as corrupt and shun it, but I shun their two as well, where they exalt it. It's just this strange thing. Why don't they exalt that one? And why isn't there a movement saying that that's the original text? It's because it's got so many errors that it's obvious, and it's like people look at it and roll their eyes. But Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are not that far away from it, Anyway, so that's a great little saying. I might just read it again. Aleph, B, and D are three of the most scandalously corrupt copies extant, exhibit the most shamefully mutilated text which are anywhere to be met with, have become, by whatever process, for the history is wholly unknown, the depositories of the largest amount of fabricated readings, ancient blunders, and intentional perversions of truth, which are discoverable in any known copies of the Word of God. So there's Dean John Burgon, the Revision Revised, page 16. Hermann Hoskier, who meticulously collated B and Aleph, and a host of other manuscripts in the early 20th century, fully documented over 3,000 differences between B and Aleph in the Gospels alone. They're on record, which I have. So this is Scott Jones. 3,000 differences between B and Aleph in the Gospels alone, but Hoskier did these two manuscripts a favor by only documenting 3,000 plus differences. For Hoskier, likewise, enumerated and omitted 17 different categories of differences, which he didn't tabulate. Those differences, while very much real, were slightly less significant than the other categories of differences, and thus had Hoskier tabulated and documented all the real actual differences between B and Aleph, only in the Gospels alone, mind you, then the number would have been simply staggering, as in many times more than 3,000 plus differences between B and Aleph in the Gospels alone. That is also a matter of plain empirical verifiable fact. And then he writes, however, the ostrich has nothing on the modern biblical textual critic. For a few, at least, of the magicians of the critical text are aware of this phenomenon, documented by Burgon, Hoskier, and others. But like the ostrich, they ignore it. They ignore the actual empirical, verifiable evidence with its searing implications, just like the evolutionist ignores the searing implications of the sudden appearance of highly complex arthropods in the Cambrian explosion, albeit in the same way as the evolutionist employs cladistical analysis and other contrived mechanisms to make these searing implications magically disappear, poof. So the modern magicians of the critical text do the exact same thing. For in the mere blink of an eye, those thousands and thousands of differences between Aleph and B suddenly vanish into thin air. Presto, changeo, gone. Have another shot of Kool-Aid, brother, and if you can spare a dime, it's on the house. The whole house of cards of modern biblical textual criticism is like that. Or he's sort of alluding to that. So it's quite interesting that he's mentioning here about that there's 17 categories that Hoskier didn't use. So we're looking at just one category that he used, and he found 3,000 differences. So according to textual critic Fenton Hort, so let's have a look at who Mr. Hort is. So this is Mr. Hort here. Great guy to invite around your house at Christmas to dress up like Santa. He would probably talk to the dead and have Unitarian friends with him. F.J.A. Hort was an Irish-born theologian and editor with Brock Foss Westcott of the critical edition of the New Testament of the original Greek. So when I say Westcott and Hort, here he is. He is your man. Okay, so he survived up until 1892, age 64. Okay. According to textual critic Fenton Hort, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus were derived from a much earlier common source. Have you heard that before? Have you heard James White say the Vaticanus and P75? There's a direct line of a direct lineage there that showed that they had an earlier ancestor and all this. The date of which cannot be later than the early part of the 2nd century and may well be yet earlier. So it's like this phantom manuscript that they don't have, but they're saying they're related. Okay, so here's an example of the differences in Matthew 1:18 to 19. So we see, most of the documents have the nomina sacra, but here we have the difference is they're swapped around. So Codex Vaticanus says to their, and that will be Jesu Christu. So here it has to their Christu Jesu. Okay. And notice both of them have the Genesis with one nu instead of the two nus like the Textus Receptus, but that's a whole nother issue. And it has para here instead of this one has the here. Okay. So it's only a few small differences, but there are differences. When I'm saying small differences, I mean small differences in a sense of what they're showing here. And usually, because it's a Wikipedia article, people will fight to put something that's hardly relevant. It's like a bit of a Mark Ward situation where it's like, the Bibles are all saying the same thing. And you point out, what about 12 verses of Mark and a woman caught in adultery? There's 24 verses gone. It's like, yeah, but that's not much. When you compare it to everything that agrees, it's like, no one's talking about what agrees. We're talking about what's missing. He's talking about false friends. We're talking about missing friends. So, biblical scholar B.H. Streeter. So I'm not really sure who he is. We might just crack that open. We may as well go through this stuff as we're going. Burnett Hillman Streeter was an English Anglican theologian, biblical scholar, and text critic. So born in 1874, and he died in 1937. So, okay. So the thing is, with Sinaiticus scholarship, he's probably like really well known. I have no idea who some of these guys are. Biblical scholar B.H. Streeter remarked that there was a great agreement between the Codex of the Vulgate of Jerome. Okay, so we're looking at sort of like another section here. So what I might do, I might actually just quickly bring up an article by Taylor De Soto on P75. Pretty sure he wrote it for Stephen Boyce. Here, is there evidence of a clean transmission from P75 to Codex Vaticanus? So this is the type of thing that gets said. Now, this comes off the back of, like, you know, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have this ancient document that backs them up, but we don't have it, but surely it's there. So in a recent YouTube debate between Jeff Riddle and Dr. Stephen Boyce, the claim was made that P75 has a clean transmission up to Vaticanus, spanning the 150-year gap between the two. This occurs around the 24-minute mark of the video, which can be found here. In this article, I want to present my reader with information regarding this particular claim. In order to frame this discussion, it is important to discuss what it means for a manuscript to have a clean transmission to another manuscript. This isn't defined at all in the debate, but is a critical point. A critical component of Dr. Boyce's presentation. So basically, it goes through this type of thing. Okay, so I'll just read some of the main bits, and then we'll get to the bit where it shows you there's only 78% agreement. The number of shared readings between any two texts constitutes their pre-genealogical coherence. This is expressed as a percentage of the number of places where two witnesses are comparable. So Gary and Wasserman, a new approach to New Testament textual criticism. And notice James White's always saying, oh, the TR people are inconsistent. They don't have a consistent way of looking at manuscripts. You look at Revelation 16:5, they got one standard, 1 John 5:7, another standard. Then you've got, but what are all these new approaches? Why don't they follow Ruckman? Why don't they follow Westcott and Hort's methodology? Why don't they follow Nestle's methodology? Why don't they follow the Nestle-Aland group and the United Bible Society's methodology? Why don't they follow Bart Ehrman's methodology? Now they've got the CBGM and they're saying throw everything out and we've got a new methodology. It's like, who's being consistent here? So according to Gary and Wasserman, 78% pre-genealogical coherence serves as a sort of baseline or cutoff point in determining whether or not two manuscripts should even be considered as relatives to one another. Okay, so it's like if it's 77, 76, it's like no, they're not even related. Okay, so if two manuscripts have less than 78 coherence, it is very likely that they're not directly related. Okay, so when we go down, so once we know that. So what about this clean transmission? So P75 has a 79.1% pre-genealogical coherence with Codex Vaticanus. And so it just scrapes in. So people like James White, they're related. It's like, no, then it. And who made up this 78%? Was it 80? And they went, hang on, this is 79.1. Okay, we'll lower it to 78 just so we can squeeze this manuscript in as well. Was it like that? Half the time it is. And so when you take that into consideration with Codex Sinaiticus and P75, which is Papyrus 75, you can look at some of these things like Hort saying, oh, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus were derived from a much older common source, the date of which cannot be later than the early part of the 2nd century and may well be yet earlier. So this phantom document, this phantom manuscript, and they're saying, oh, it's an older thing, and these are related and all this. Well, Hosky was saying that they've got so many differences. Burgon was saying there's huge differences. And when you look at modern scholarship, oftentimes they're fudging the books when it comes to Vaticanus and P75. And so, I would take Fenton Hort's estimation that this, comes from an earlier manuscript and they're related somehow with a pinch of salt. So B.H. Streeter, so that was Burnett, Hillman, Streeter, remarked that there was a great agreement between the Codex of the Vulgate of Jerome. According to him, Origen brought the Alexandrian text type that was used in this codex to Caesarea. Okay, so let's look at where Caesarea is, because this gets mentioned quite a bit. Caesarea Maritima. It was an ancient or medieval port city on the coast of the eastern Mediterranean. Okay, so here we see Israel, so it's up here. Okay, so just to give you that visual for when we say Caesarea, it's not part of France, it's not part of Morocco or anything, it's right there in Israel. And it was subsequently employed by Jerome for his Latin revision. So Streeter is saying that Origen, so maybe we should introduce Origen here as well. An interesting character, Origen of Alexandria, from 185 to 253, also known as Origen Adamantius, was an early Christian scholar, early Christian/Gnostic scholar, Asiatic and theologian who was born and spent half of his career in Alexandria. So it's in Egypt. He was a prolific writer who wrote roughly 2,000 treatises on multiple branches of theology, including textual criticism, biblical exegesis, and hermeneutics and homiletics and spirituality. He was one of the most influential and controversial figures in early Christian theology, apologetics, and aestheticism. He has been described as the greatest genius the early church ever precluded. Now, some people say that he actually castrated himself, but I've heard, some TR people say, "Oh no, this guy castrated himself." But when you look at it, you've just got to be careful with making those type of statements. You got to make sure that it's absolutely 100% true. But anyway, so Origen was a very interesting character, and it would be great to probably do a whole series on him. But I just thought I'd introduce him. So basically, you're looking at in the 2nd century into the mid-3rd century, you have Origen. So according to Streeter, Origen brought the Alexandrian text type that was used. So this phantom manuscript that was used in this codex to Caesarea, and it was subsequently employed by Jerome for his Latin. So it's like Jerome used it for his one. Between the 4th and 12th centuries, 7 or more correctors worked on this codex, making it one of the most corrected manuscripts in existence. So this is Skeet, scribes and correctors of Codex Sinaiticus. During his investigation in Petersburg, Tischendorf enumerated 14,800 corrections in the portion which was only held in Petersburg. So that's 2/3 of the text. According to textual critic David C. Parker, so many people might know him, he's quite famous. The full codex has about 23,000 corrections. So 23,000 corrections, that's a lot of corrections. In addition to these corrections, some letters were marked by dots as doubtful. For example, they have the theta and the eta, and or I guess it's a tav and the eta with these dots above them. Okay. Notable omissions. Okay, so we're going to go through some of the notable omissions. The New Testament portion lacks the following passages. So omitted verses, Matthew 12:47. And so I won't go through all of these, but you can see, that's a symbol for Sinaiticus. B is a symbol for Vaticanus. L is Codex Regius. And so, oftentimes if you just go to Wikipedia, you can sort of go through a lot of this. It doesn't really make, to me, it doesn't make a lot of difference. Because these guys are trying to say, these are related manuscripts. We've got earlier ones that relate to this and to that. And they're still trying to construct their Greek text. But we've already got our Greek text. We're not trying to construct it. We're just watching what they do and go, hang on, you don't do it that way. Hang on, that's wrong. Oh, you're going to throw that out too, eh? Oh, you're going to add that book. Okay. Book of Enoch or something. The Gospel of Matthew 12:47, gone. Matthew 16:2b to 3, gone. Matthew 17:21, gone. Matthew 18:11, gone. Matthew 23:14, gone. In Mark 9:44 and 46, gone. Mark 11:26, 15:28 are gone. Mark 16:9 to 20, 12 complete verses are gone. And notice the long ending of Mark. And notice they have these here. It's Aleph and Vaticanus, and then they have K. So there's no link there. But the Syriac and the Armenian. So the only two manuscripts are really Aleph and B. And they not only, it's not like they just have them missing, but there's space for this to be included, but they're not included there. And so it's quite amazing that they just delete them. And in the NA28, they're double bracketed, which means that they are completely doubted. So you have 1,637 manuscripts that back up the Textus Receptus reading, but you have two that don't. And these, two Greek manuscripts that don't, and these two have the space for it. But they're in double brackets saying that they are not even to be looked at or even imagined to be genuine. So Peter Gurry calls them apocryphal readings. James White says they're Gnostic readings. So if you buy but the thing is, most of these are in modern Bibles. So this is the thing. They have Bibles with Gnostic readings in them. They have Bibles with corruption, and they're like, well, let's get rid of those. And, oh, no, we'll keep them in because we don't want to upset someone. And, this is their text criticism. This is the result of what they're doing. Luke 10:32 is omitted. Luke 17:36, Gospel of John 5:4, the Pericope Adulterae, John 7:53 through to 8:11, 12 complete verses, gone. Now, this was most likely omitted due to the lection cycle, which, because it was a bit of an abrupt story. And so when you're reading through, it's like all of a sudden talking about this woman who's committed adultery. It's like having the Christmas story and you've got the whole story of Herod killing the children. It's like, do we really want to say that at Christmas in front of the kids? And it's like, let's just move that. We'll talk about that at church rather than, just a nice, friendly Sunday school lesson or something like that. So what they actually moved this, and there's proof of that. And Maurice Robinson, he's just nailed it, even though he's just a majority text guy. And I think anyone going through this issue would have to agree that, this was moved because of the election cycle. And Dean Burgon, he actually said that the vast majority of variants are because of the election cycle. Acts 8:37 gone. Acts 15:37, 24:7, and 28:29 gone. Romans 16:24 gone. And then there's a whole bunch of omitted phrases. So we're just going through, heaps in Matthew, Mark, and so I could be here forever just going through these. But I will leave that to your own discretion and time. I don't want to go through every single one of these. Now, we probably will go through some of these as we get more into the manuscript. But, I mean, pretty much you're looking at, it's just like reading the NIV or the ESV or something. It's just filled with, this one has it, this other one doesn't, this one does, this one. And oftentimes you'll find Vaticanus has a reading, but Sinaiticus doesn't. But then Sinaiticus has a reading and Vaticanus doesn't. And it's like, which one are you going to go with? And then, P75, that's got to, like, even if we look at P75, like, because we just looked at the 78% thing. Notice this, the fact its text closely resembles that of the 4th century. So that's the thing. It just becomes a consensus, something they parrot, and it just becomes fact, where when you look at the details, it's just scraping over the line. You know what I mean? Okay, so then you got additions. So they add to the word of God, and strange readings where it has, and when the centurion returned to the house in that hour he found the slave well. Here it has, say peace to this house. Here it has, and another took a spear and pierced his side, and immediately came out water and blood. So it's quite interesting. In Sinaiticus, Jesus doesn't die on the cross from that. He actually dies from having a spear in his side, because later on he starts talking. He's talking just before this. And so you have Jesus. It's like, he died on the cross for your sins. That's how he died. We were discussing in the Textus Receptus Academy, some people are like, well, it says whom you killed and hung on a tree. See, it's wrong, as if it's a chronological order. You killed him and then took him down and then you put him on a tree somewhere. It's just ridiculous. And so it's actually, you killed him and also you hung him on a tree, which is against Hebrew culture, because it says cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. I mean, it's quite obvious. We just read the other parts of Galatians and places where it mentions those type of things. And read the Old Testament. Most people don't even know that's part of the Old Testament. But, these people see, it's an error in the King James and all this sort of stuff. And, well, I mean, here they have Jesus dying from being stabbed. And that's how he died. That's in Codex Sinaiticus. And so you get their best manuscript, apparently, and Jesus isn't even dying on the cross from those wounds. He's dying from getting stabbed, speared in his side, Anyway, unique and other variants. Matthew 7:22, and cast out numerous demons in your name. It's Paula. Matthew 8:12, will go out. So some of these don't make much sense without the context. So the leaven of bread of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So they don't have the. Okay, so here it has the 70. Just strange readings, but they're not showing the actual correct reading. So it's hard to know what's good, what's bad, and why they've done that. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of other readings. Variants in agreement with the majority text. Okay, so then they've got a bunch of variants that are in agreement with what would usually be called the Byzantine text. Orthodox belief supporting reading. So this is through water and blood and spirit, 1 John 5:6. So I think it's the word and spirit that is added. Bart Ehrman says this was a corrupt reading from a proto-Orthodox scribe, although this conclusion has not gained wide support. So, it is Wikipedia. You've got Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, Mormons editing this stuff. And so they just go, Bart Ehrman said it. So we put him on the shelf as the best. And so we can quote him. So there's going to be a lot that I disagree with stuff. But we just want to get the consensus to what everyone's thinking about it, what they're reading about it. A lot of people would just go to Wikipedia. Then we're going to start peeling back, looking at other things. Early history, provenance. So I've gone for 1 hour and 45 minutes. So I might go through, say, to the end of this provenance section. It depends on how much I have to explain, but or the history. So we'll go through this, and then we will. I think I'll shut it down. But little is known of the manuscript's early history, according to Hort. It was written in the West, so a lot of this is speculation, especially if you think that the manuscript was written in 1840. All this is just nothing. So, but for a lot of people, they believe this, or they see this as plausible. Little is known of the manuscript's early history. According to Hort, it was written in the West, probably in Rome, as suggested by the fact that the chapter division in the Acts of the Apostles, common to Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, occurs in no other Greek manuscript, but is found in several manuscripts of the Latin Vulgate. Robinson, so that's Joseph Armitage Robinson, so he was a priest in the Church of England in the early 20th century, considered this argument, suggesting that this system of chapter divisions was introduced into the Vulgate by Jerome himself as a result of his studies at Caesarea. According to Kenyon, so Kenyon's quite an important person to know about. Sir Frederick George Kenyon was an English paleographer and biblical and classical scholar. And so oftentimes you'll see him cited as Kenyon said this, Kenyon said that. Now, so a lot of what Kenyon said, it backs up the critical text, but he also said a lot of things that actually come against a lot of modern critical text concepts. And so according to Kenyon, the forms of the letters are Egyptian, and they were found in an Egyptian papyri of earlier date. Then you got this guy called Gard Therusen. He was a German ancient historian, paleographer, librarian, and professor from Leipzig University. And then it has Ropes and Angelico. So these are just all professors. They all thought it was written in Egypt. Harris. So all different types of people. He was an English biblical scholar and curator of manuscripts. So he believed that the manuscript came from the library of Pamphilius at Caesarea. So the theological library of Caesarea Maritima, or simply the library of Caesarea, was the library of the Christians of Caesarea in Israel in ancient times. And so that was in Palestine, or what would be called Israel. Streeter. So we looked at Streeter, Skeet and Milne. Very interesting, these guys, because they did a lot of translation work from languages into Latin. Also believed that it was produced in Caesarea. Okay, so people are saying, okay, it's in Caesarea. Okay, it had Egyptian letters. So there's a lot of opinions here. So he's saying the letters are Egyptian. He's saying that's the style that it's written in. But people are saying it's from Caesarea. Notice there's no, and there is an alternative view that this was written by a modern forger named Simonides. So maybe it does mention Simonides in this article. Maybe if I type in 18 or Simon. Yeah, it does have a whole section on Simonides. That's very interesting. Okay. All right, so where did we get to? Provenance. Okay, so the date. The codex can be dated with a reasonable degree of confidence between the 4th century and the early 5th century. It could not have been written before about 325 because it contains the Eusebian canons. So what are the Eusebian canons? A lot of people have no idea about this. These are just, it's almost like an index to what was written. I guess it's a bit like a table of contents. So they are the writing system of dividing the four Gospels used between late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. The divisions into chapters and verses used in modern text date only from the 13th and 16th centuries, respectively. The sections are indicated in the margin of nearly all Greek and Latin manuscripts of the Bible and usually summarized in canon tables at the start of the Gospels. There are about 1,165 sections, 355 for Matthew, 235 for Mark, 343 for Luke, and 232 for John. The numbers, however, vary slightly in different manuscripts. The canon tables were made to create a sense of divinity within the reader's soul, to understand and reflect upon the various colors and patterns to achieve a higher connection with God. I'm not sure about that. Maybe that was edited this morning. It looks like, someone snuck in there. So these are basically Eusebian canons. They're written like this. So you have it at the beginning of the document. And it's written down to show you what the contents is. Okay, so, and you would have 1, 2, 3, 4 Gospels. So most of the time it sort of looked like this. Okay, so just to give you an idea, we'll go through the Eusebian canons. It's going to be an interesting thing to go through when we look at dating. It says, which is a terminus post quem. Okay, so that specifies the known limits of dating for events or items. So I guess it's like, the photocopier was made in 1949, and so you can't have anything being photocopied by a photocopier before then, or else it's anachronistic. So that's all it means. The terminus antiquem is less certain. So the terminus antiquem would be, so this would be the postquem, so beforehand, and so afterwards. So they know when it wasn't written that early, but then afterwards they're like, well, we're not that certain. Milne and Skeet relied on small cursive notes to assert that the date of the production of the codex was not likely to be much later than about 360. More recent research suggests that these cursive notes could be as late as the early 5th century. Tischendorf theorized that Codex Sinaiticus was one of 50 copies of the Bible commissioned by Eusebius by Roman Emperor Constantine after his conversion to Christianity, De Vita Constantini. This hypothesis was supported by Pere Batefol. So that's him there. It's a French Catholic priest and prominent theologian. Gregory and Skeet believed it was already in production when Constantine placed his order, but had to be suspended in order to accommodate different page dimensions. Frederick Kenyon argued there is not the least sign of either of them having been at Constantinople. The fact that Sinaiticus was collated with the manuscript of Pamphilus so late as the 6th century seems to show that it was not originally written at Caesarea. Okay, so I'm just going to go through this a little bit. Now, I'll just summarize what Kenyon's saying. So he's saying there is not the least sign of either of them having been at Constantinople. The fact that Sinaiticus was collated with the manuscript of Pamphilus so late as the 6th century seems to show that it was not originally written at Caesarea. Okay, so that's his opinion on that. But when we look here, Tischendorf theorized that Codex Sinaiticus was one of the 50 copies of the Bible commissioned from Eusebius. So Eusebius, a very interesting guy. So, and then you got the Roman Emperor Constantine. So let's just jump into 50 Bibles of Constantine. The 50 Bibles of Constantine were Bibles in the original Greek language commissioned in 331 by Constantine I and prepared by Eusebius of Caesarea, and were made for the use of the Bishop of Constantinople in the growing number of churches in that very new city. Eusebius quoted the letter of commission in his Life of Constantine, and it is the only surviving source from which we know the existence of the Bibles. So this is quite an important little thing. So the 50 Bibles, biblical canon, it is speculated that this commission may have provided motivation for the development of the canon lists, because remember when we were looking at the lists, it was the Eusebian canons. Okay. The canon lists, and that's Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, are possible surviving examples of these Bibles. So they're speculating that these are, and so, but it's interesting to know that this did happen. There is no evidence among the records of the First Council of Nicaea of any determination of the canon. However, Jerome in his prologue to Judith makes the claim that the Book of Judith was found by the Nicene Council to have been among the number of the sacred scriptures. According to Eusebius, Constantine I wrote him in his letter, "I have thought it expedient to instruct your prudence to order 50 copies of the sacred scriptures, the provision and use of which you know to be the most needful for the instruction of the church, to be written on prepared parchment in a legible manner and in a convenient portable form by professional transcribers thoroughly practiced in their art." It's like, yes, Sinaiticus has so many errors, so it's like, oh yeah, well, that must have been, the professional transcribed Bible. Excuse me. About accomplishing the emperor's demand. Such were the emperor's commands, which were followed by the immediate execution of the work itself, which we sent him in magnificent and elaborately bound volumes of a threefold and fourfold form. This is the usual way in which Eusebius's text is translated, but there are more possibilities because the phrase "en polytelos askemenos," and so I won't go through the rest of that Greek there, has many potential meanings. 3 or 4 codices were prepared at the time. So these are different people, Cursop Lake and Bernard de Montfaucon. Codices were sent in 3 or 4 boxes. That's Heineken. Codices were prepared with 3 or 4 folios, Scrivener. The text of the codices was written in 3 or 4 columns per page, Tischendorf and Gebhardt, Gregory, and Cursop Lake. Codices were sent by 3 or 4s and 6. Some codices contained 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but others contained 4, including John Edward Swartz. Anathesis of Alexandria referred to another request of producing Bible manuscripts. I sent to him volumes containing the Holy Scriptures, which he had ordered me to prepare for him. So I actually called him Anathesis. His name is, I've got some of these Greek names are just really hard to. Hard to say.
Athanasius.
It's Athanasius. That's so embarrassing because he's like one of the main characters. Okay. Athanasius. There we go. Of Alexandria, of course. referred to another request, and so I just read that Athanasius could have received his request between 337 and 339. Okay, so then we're going through Codex Vaticanus. So I just thought I'd point out that, yeah, the 50 Bibles of Constantine, that many people claim Vaticanus and Sinaiticus were part of that. Okay. So then this was commissioned by Eusebius. And so a quick look at Eusebius and who he was. I recommend everyone read the writings of Eusebius. His church history, ecclesiastical history is quite interesting. So he was from 265 to 339, and a Greek or Palestinian historian of Christianity, exegete, Christian polemicist. In about 314, he became the bishop of Caesarea Maritima in the Roman province of Syria, Palestina. And so there's a little picture of him there. And yeah, I think that's about all we have to know about him at the moment. But yeah, he invented the Eusebian canons. Okay, so, and then we have Constantine. So I'm pretty sure everyone would know who Constantine is, so I won't go there. All right, so that's under the heading of date. Then we've got scribes and correctors. And so what I might do, I might actually stop it there because I've gone for about 2 hours already. And then we'll look at some of these scribes and correctors because I don't want to sort of rush through some of this. I want to make sure that we read everything, that we look a few things up, and that we get a good feel of what the general consensus is about this manuscript, and then we'll start examining the pros and cons of, whether this is a forgery or whether it's not. I mean, that's the reason why I'm doing this video, or this series of videos, is because it has been claimed to be a forgery. If it is a forgery, then it's quite amazing, the implications of that. And so I think, some people would watch these videos and just go, oh, this guy's a King James only guy. Well, I'm reading through consensus material. I'm not, people accuse me of being in an echo chamber and all sorts of things. I read anything that's given to me. I look at it, I examine it, I think about it. Just because I don't come up with the same conclusions as someone like James White or Dan Wallace or Bart Ehrman doesn't mean that I'm in an echo chamber. And I invite people to critique what I'm saying. And so anyway, we'll go through this, and then we'll go through some books on Sinaiticus. We'll go through Stephen Avery's website. We'll also go through the Chick Track, David Daniels series. We'll go through Chris Pinto's material, and we'll look at all these things. And so anyway, guys, I'm going to bail. I'm going to split. So we've gone for 2 hours and 3 minutes, and we were up to, where was it, the dating? We're up to scribes and correctors. Now, if you feel like there's anything that I've sort of left out or just sort of skimmed over that you really wanted me to, go into, or you're hoping that I'd explain a little bit more, just write it in the comments and I'll see what I can do. But apart from that, I'll see you next time, guys. God bless you. Oh, yeah, so we've got some comments. So we've got Bible version conspiracy. So that is Joseph and Destiny live in the dream over there in the United States. So he's saying, good day, mate. And then we've got Ashati saying, peace and grace, Nick. I'm working and lurking. So hopefully, this helps also with going through these videos, because sometimes people will mention something like, say, the Eusebian canons. It's like, oh, what's that? A bunch of canons, like some, it just, I guess in a way, I want to bring people on a bit of a journey so that they can, when we're discussing these things in depth, we don't just sound like we know nothing about it. I mean, it's like if we want to prove that this is a forgery, we have to be at least on the same level of scholarship as these critics, the text critics. And so we have to know the contents of the Shepherd of Hermes to prove that that is a key indicator that it is a forgery and things like that. If you don't know those things, you just sort of, when you're talking to someone and they're pretending to be an expert on a car and they're just waffling on and you're thinking they know nothing. We don't want to be like that. We want to know our stuff, and it doesn't take much just to refresh ourselves and go over things and think about things. And we should be using our minds, and God will use us in this generation to, because either way, we know that this manuscript is corrupt by, just reading Burgon and many other people who looked at it. So we can take the bog standard general idea that, okay, the manuscripts are corrupt. We're not sure whether it's a forgery or not, but we don't go with those manuscripts anyway. So, but we're looking at that, but we're taking a step further where we're going, okay, it could be a forgery, and we're leaving that open just as much as we're leaving open that it might not be a forgery. But either way, we've already rejected it. So it's a bit like we've tasted the soup and gone, that's disgusting. There's something rotten in it. Now, whether it's just the chicken's gone rotten or the chef has deliberately put rat meat in it, well, it's like, okay, well, now we'll investigate both of those claims. But either way, it's disgusting. We're not going to use it. And so, Helg says real photos of Hoskia. So yeah, that would be an interesting thing. It would be interesting to see if someone's actually gone to the effort of uploading those to the internet. I guess that's where a lot of the microfilm would come from in, like, say, some of the early United Bible Societies websites, the Munster website. I know that a lot of things are on microfilm, and they're trying to get it across. And sometimes it's on microfilm and the manuscript's destroyed. So, yeah, quite an interesting thing. But, yeah, Hoskia has an interesting story, and so I might even go through that one time, where he was an international banker. And so, yeah. Anyway, God bless you guys. Thanks for that question, Helg, and we'll see you at another time.